Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So just reflecting about what we've been doing over the last few days, remember last weekend when we made the forecast that this would really be a bad week? As I mentioned yesterday and the day before, it is, in the sense of deaths, a bad week. In fact, every day there seems to be a record of number of deaths compared to the day before. In fact, New York today had, again, another record of, I think the city itself was about 820 plus deaths. But what we were predicting with the increase and the real adherence to the physical separation, the guidelines that the Vice President talks about, the physical separation, at the same time as we're seeing the increase in deaths, we're seeing rather dramatic decrease in the need for hospitalizations. Like I think yesterday was something like 200 new hospitalizations, and it's been as high as 1,400 at any given time. So that is going in the right direction. I say that, and I always remind myself when I say that, that means that what we are doing is working, and therefore we need to continue to do it. I know I sound like a broken record. That's good. I want to sound like a broken record. Let's just keep doing it. I get questions a lot, Dr. Birx and I, about these numbers, the projections that you went with from 100,000, 200,000, now down to 60,000. That's a sign that when, as I keep saying, when you take the data you have and you reinsert it into the model modifies. Data is real. Model is hypothesis. Okay? So that's what you have to do, and that's what I think we're seeing. The other thing that's some just broad, general good news from the standpoint of a scientific standpoint, that there are a lot of candidate potential therapeutics that are going into clinical trials now that we're sponsoring at the NIH, the kinds of clinical trials that will give us the answer. Are they safe? Are they effective? And just what is the capability of using them under what circumstances, as prophylaxis, as treatment, in early disease, in late disease. So as the time goes by and we have the public health measures to try and contain this, we're doing an awful lot from a scientific standpoint so that when we do get to next year, next fall, next winter, hopefully we'll have something that we can offer in addition to the very important public health measures. So I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Then just a question for the doctors. I'm curious, did you see this information out of the CDC in South Korea today that shows that they're seeing evidence of reinfection in some people who had been cured of coronavirus? And what does that mean for our understanding of this?
Yeah. Have you seen that?
I'm not aware of what you're speaking about now, but clearly there have been anecdotal mentioning of what appear to be reinfection. You have to really be very careful when you say reinfection, because what and we were dealing with this with even Ebola back during the Ebola time, that someone might still, when someone does a test on them, do a PCR on a body fluid of some sort and be able to detect what are likely nucleotides that are not replication competent. So if you're telling me, which I don't think they're saying, that someone has coronavirus disease, they get sick, it's documented, they get better, and then a month or so later, they get sick with documented coronavirus disease. I don't think that's what they're saying, but I don't want to jump the gun on it until I see the data.
They use the word reactivate. Is that different?
Yeah. Well, yeah, what reactivating what means is that it depends what you mean by reactivating. If someone clearly is ill and they have virus isolated from them, that you may have a prolonged course. I'd like to see how long they reactivate. I mean, if they were sick and had documented virus, and then 3 months later they had documented virus, is that reactivation or is that infection with another virus? I'd like to see the data before I really comment on that. Yeah.
Question, Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci, I wanted to ask about medical criteria. You had a discussion with Dr. Birx and the other public health experts on Tuesday, I understand. Can you discuss what is the medical criteria that you guys are discussing in order to reopen the government? What is the medical criteria?
Well, it's less medical criteria than it is public health criteria. And that is, and I think it's really important because often people say reopen the government like it's a a light switch that goes on and off for the entire country. We have a very large country with really different patterns of disease and outbreaks in different parts of the country. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be, what is the kinetics of an outbreak? Is it on the way down? Is it essentially out? Is it still smoldering and possibly going up? I think you're going to have to take it individually. And
Are there some benchmarks that you're looking at, though? I mean, are there some numbers that you're looking at, some data that you would like to see? What would you like to see before that happens?
yeah, well, I will allow Dr. Birx to come up with just my own opinion. I don't think they're going to be benchmarks that are going to be consistent from one to the other. For example, I would not want to pull back at all in New York until I was clear that that curve really was doing what we've seen in other countries, a very steep decline down, and we had the capability, if there was a resurgence, of having everything in place to be able to do the containment as opposed to struggling with mitigation with what we've been doing. That's different than a relatively smaller city, town, or whatever you, in the Midwest or mountain regions, which is generally very well controlled. What I would want to see, do we have the capability of doing the isolation, contact tracing, and suppression of it? So it really varies differently. So I don't think there's one medical criteria. But Deb, if you want to speak to it. And then I'll get
We'll tag team together. So when we've been talking about the asymptomatic group, and that's why I gave you that testing data where 11% of young people under 25 were positive, many of them very low-grade symptoms. What we will be triangulating for you is the testing data with hospital admissions, and then you'll be able to start seeing spectrum of disease. Because what you're not seeing in spectrum of disease is people who never even think that this is something significant, that what they have. We're seeing the significant cases. In testing, you can see that we're getting a lot of people in with symptoms aren't positive. And so really finding out, what is the R naught? Is it 6? Is it 5? And the only way to do that at this point right now is to get the antibody tests out there and go into these places that had significant disease. When we talk about attack rates of 7 per 1,000, like New York, and 5 per 1,000 in New Jersey, and test the healthcare workers, the first responders, all of the nursing homes for antibody, and really get to your question. Because right now it's still theoretic. We understand they're modeling this, and we will get the data to actually look at that. You will see what others have been presenting. So you presented the 6. What others are presenting, importantly, is they're modeling what's happening with mitigation. And they're publishing that the R naught with mitigation is approaching like 1.3 and 1.5. So that, think of what that is. If it was 6, and then with mitigation, we have it into the 1s, that really shows the power of the American people. No one has varied R naughts like that without a vaccine. But this is what's happening with really the power of the American people. Tony?
Yeah. Ditto to everything that Dr. Birx said, but I couldn't help but thinking when you talk about, you know what the worst enemy of an R naught is? Physical separation.
Team, subscribe for more of these type of videos.